Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. This is Game 5 of March Smashness 2020, The Gauntlet, featuring number 4, Rockstar Ghosts, versus number 29, Fairy Sharks. If you're watching this video, you know that Rockstar Ghosts won in 2 games rather than 3, and that they were pretty dominant with a score of 15-8 and 19-12. I'll talk a little bit more about the Game 2 score in a bit. But what was interesting is that they polled at roughly 50% each. That was really surprising because this was a match that I felt really confident going into, knowing that I'd be playing Ghost Rockstars. No disrespect to Fairy Sharks, I like them a lot. They can destroy a lot of minions. I just didn't think that they were the best suited to handle this faction. So the fact that they got 50% of the vote was kind of surprising. If I had to guess, I would say that it had less to do with Fairy Sharks and more to do with Ghost Rockstars, because for some reason, people seem to think that Ghosts are pretty mediocre, even with their Titan. And that's really surprising, because this team just gels together. Fairy Sharks, they don't break bases as well. What they do is they control the board. They can kill anything that gets played, potentially multiple minions in a turn. One of the problems with that is that Ghost Rockstars can play several minions in a turn. In fact, they have a bunch of 0 to breakpoint strategies where they can do nothing and they just overtake you. And the only thing you have to worry about is Megalodon and playing around that. Usually Megalodon would trigger either some Makos or Blood in the Water, but if you could avoid Megalodon entirely, then you're perfectly fine with that. And that's why I like to play for solo bases a lot with Rockstar Ghosts, because a team like Fairy Sharks can't really do anything about it. So it's not surprising to me that the scores are pretty lopsided, all things considered. I think that both players knew it was going to be an uphill battle going into it. So there's not really a shock there other than the initial percentage if you were one of the people who picked Fairy Sharks. But what's really interesting about this matchup is that there is the potential for Fairy Sharks to wreak a lot of havoc in ways that you may not have thought of. And I started to actually experience some of those in Game 2. Even though it was pretty much in complete control for Ghost Rockstars, over the course of the game, you started to feel a little bit of that annoyance, and it was hard to pull the final trigger until the last turn, and I could have won the game in 2 ways. I could have won via playing Shady Deal a second time with Cream Puff Man, or I could have gone for the big play, which based on the score I chose to do, because I thought it would be good to send a statement as to just how powerful this team is. Yes, it ended up giving more points to Fairy Sharks because they were also on the base when it broke. But at the end of the day, 19-12 is a really commanding score. And it tells a similar story to 15-8. But being able to play Shady Deal and break a base at the same time for 5 points, that's pretty significant as far as scoring goes. So what could Fairy Sharks have done, and what did we experience a little bit of? One of the things about Ghost Rockstars that makes them so great is the fact that they have access to talent-based card draw from both the Monarch, who can draw a groupie, which can be, used like a generic card for Cream Puff Man. Cream Puff Man just says discard a card, it doesn't matter what it is, it can be a groupie. There's plenty of times where I like to discard the groupie to play across the divide to get all the groupies back anyway, and there's really no net loss. But the classic rocker can also give you a card. This is really important because it lets you bring out the Cream Puff Man on 1 turn, draw a card, and then immediately use its talent. So that way you're not just dumping your hand for no tangible gain. You have instant access to a card in your discard pile. For something like Shady Deal, being able to play it twice in 1 turn, this is really powerful, particularly if you play Shady Deal the turn that you bring out Cream Puff Man. So that is obviously very powerful, but Fairy Sharks have a way of disrupting this. And the first way is that they can kill those minions. Anything that is roughly within 6 power range is killable by the combination of Glimmer and Great White, or any one of the shark actions that also triggers destruction. So I have these engine minions that I want to get for a long period of time, and I'm leaving them out there to draw cards, but they're cannon fodder for Fairy Sharks, and I have to be really careful because I want to put those on bases where them by themselves, but destruction is also the greatest trigger of the Fairy Shark Burst. That's how they get in all their extra minion plays, and that can be really dangerous. So you have to guard against that, but we have Incorporeal. Incorporeal is a ghost action that can protect 2 minions, and it's great for those minions. but Fairy Sharks can counter that in a number of ways. The first one is Magic Ward, which definitely played a role in Game 2. Magic Ward prevents playing actions on other players' other players can't play actions on their minions, which meant that I couldn't play Incorporeal on the Classic Rocker when I finally got him out, and that's why he died fairly quickly. You have 2 copies of Incorporeal, but they can, prevent you from playing them at all with Magic Ward. They could also destroy them with Playful Tricks. Playful Tricks can destroy Incorporeal. But what's really unfortunate is that they could actually transfer it away from themselves, and that is really powerful with Tinks. So Tinks can transfer an action from any minion to itself. And transferring an action away from a minion doesn't actually count as affecting the minion. It counts as affecting the action. Whereas something like shielding, double shielding would actually block that. Actually, it wouldn't because of actions, but the principle is there. You're affecting the action, not the minion. So even though my Incorporeal Classic Rocker would be immune, Tinks could actually steal it away because I'm affecting Incorporeal, not Classic Rocker. Specifically, when you look up the definition of effect, it says that transferring an action is not a form of affecting. So that's another way that they can counter it. If you're relying on those engine minions to be there for the long haul, you can't really do that because they could be dead at any given moment. And that's really frustrating. What that means is that you have to be very conservative with your bursts and know that you may not have a time to rebuild for very long. Your engine minions, they may be used for their printed power as part of another form of burst with their movement. The Rockstars, they can do almost anything with ghosts. One of the things that they can do is just swarm for movement by putting all your guys on lower breakpoint bases and moving them up to the higher breakpoint bases. And maybe you need to approach the matchup like that. What swings it back in the Ghost Rockstar favor is that they're just extremely flexible. They have the groupie burst that can be 10 power or more, especially if you activate Door to the Beyond, which again, you have to be very careful with because Fairy Sharks can counter that in a number of ways. They can play Magic Ward to prevent it from being played on the base in the first place, and they can play Playful Tricks to destroy it after it's done. Both teams have incredible card draw. The Fairies can draw 2 to 3 cards at a given time. Puck can draw a card and play an extra action. You have Week of Sharks. Both teams are going to get access to their good cards, but I think that Ghost Rockstars are built to last. Not only because they have Recursion, but they also have Shady Deal in their back pocket. And that's something that Fairy Sharks really can't do anything against unless there was a VP farming base like City of Gold, which happens to be in that set because of the Rockstars. When you actually look at the very power outputs, Titania can play an extra minion, which might be Glimmer. That would be 5 power, although you're not really using Glimmer in that aspect. You can use Enchantment for a global power boost that will affect everyone else. But that's pretty much it. Compared to the Ghost Rockstars, depending on whether you're combining Guest Star or Ghostly Arrival, Spectre from the discard pile, it's really hard to eclipse their power level from a 0 to breakpoint standpoint, particularly if you get Door to the Beyond. There's been plenty of times where I have started with a very large hand and I dump all of it. This is actually what I did on the last turn. I dumped everything and brought out Cream Puff Man for his 5 power as well. You don't necessarily even care about the action. That's why I was foregoing Shady Deal the second time in order to finish that base off. But being able to enable those big plays and get 5 power out of it, that's going to be really powerful. The final thing I would say is that Ghost Rockstars are extremely fast. They can, as quickly as turn 2, actually solo a base. It really doesn't bode well in the Fairy Sharks' favor that you have Spirit of the Forest. Spirit of the Forest, you want to put on the most undesirable base possible and just let it deliver value because it can't be clashed. Even if Cream Puff Man were to come out, it would just move to another base. So it's going to be there for the long haul, which is why you might want to do it on turn 1. The problem is that sacrificing both of your plays, and this didn't necessarily happen in one of the actual March Smashness matches, but it is very common for Ghost Rockstars to solo a base on turn 2. And you have to imagine, if Ghost Rockstars were to go first, they enable a play, you do Spirit of the Forest, I might break a base and I'm already up, 4 or 5 points, and you haven't really taken a turn yet, that would be a very tough battle to climb. When you see the scores, you'll see that solo bases were definitely a factor, but at the end of the day, they just win bases and they win them big. So for me, no surprise there that Ghost Rockstars advance. Fairy Sharks, they can be difficult, but it's a really profound statement when I can say with sincerity that Fairy Sharks know how to make the matchup very difficult, and yet you're still winning by 5 or more points. Actually, both scores would have been a total of 7 points, which is pretty significant. That's largely due to solo bases because, if I get 5 and you get nothing, that's a pretty severe gap right there. You're clawing back at that point. So I'm happy with the results. I have Ghost Rockstars going really far. No surprise for me there, but what about for you? Let me know in the comments. I've been forgetting to ask people for the comments. This is my opinion on what we saw and what could have happened. I'm very confident that if you would have played this match a lot, Ghost Rockstars would win it pretty much 90% of the time. If they got locked up in their hand, that'd be a different story. And Fairy Sharks can make that very difficult, particularly when they discard cards when you're already low. I like to play Ghost Rockstars very aggressively. I'm very comfortable knowing that I will dump my entire hand and that for a couple of turns, I'll play with only 2 cards in my hand. Usually if I have Spectre in my discard pile anyway, I'm perfectly comfortable with that. But if you start attacking my ability to regenerate my hand by killing my engine minions, that's when I start to get a little bit more nervous. So yeah, Ghost Rockstars, unsurprisingly, advancing to round 2. Let me know what you think about it. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about Changerbot Werewolves and Dragon Tricksters, and I'm looking forward to that. Thanks so much for watching. Let's shut it down.